sister burst through the door, hysterical. I asked her what was wrong, but she was panicking to the point she couldn't speak. She just kept trying to call her boyfriend. After calming down, she explained to us that while she was driving home on a dark, somewhat secluded road, a couple of creeps began harassing her. They were driving uncomfortably close behind her, and then they tried running her off the road. She called her boyfriend, who came to her rescue by getting the guy's attention. My sister made it home, but she was worried about her boyfriend because he wasn't answering his phone. After calling again and again, he finally picked up his phone. My sister overheard some of the conversation he was having with these jerks, and she heard someone say something about a gun. She freaked out, and my parents called the police and took her down to meet with her boyfriend and a cop. Apparently, the guys were drunk and had pulled a gun on her boyfriend. They found them and hopefully punished them accordingly. People are idiots. So last year, the day after Thanksgiving, I had to be at work at 8 in the morning. I don't drive, so I had to take the train, which meant that I had to be at the station by 6 a.m. I couldn't find my jacket, and I knew it was going to be cold, but it doesn't get super cold where I am, so I just grabbed a throw blanket and started walking. I was almost to the platform for the train, and I had just barely missed the first train that would have gotten me to work slightly early when a guy got off the train. He started yelling stuff at me, but I had headphones in, so I don't know what he all said. He was riding his bike in the opposite direction, so I didn't think too much of it and just kept walking. All of a sudden, the guy flies up behind me, and he almost hit me with his bike. He started cussing at me, asking why the hell I had my beautiful body wrapped up in a blanket in this cold-ass weather. Then he offered me his coat, but I said no thanks and that I was fine. All of a sudden, out of the blue, he asks if anyone has ever gone down on me. I was so stunned that I couldn't say anything. Then he said, "I'll do it for free." At that point, I gained my composure and just said, "I'm leaving now," and he said some other vulgar things as I was walking away. I was so freaked out at that point, I was shaking, and I was so thankful that he had left me alone after I walked away, because there weren't any houses or cars around, and the only buildings were businesses, but no one would have been open there quite yet. It was Thanksgiving 2011, and I was celebrating at my grandparents' farm in the little town of Sevilla, Florida. I had had way too much to eat that holiday and was about to leave to drive back to school in Tallahassee. I stopped at the one little gas station in town to fill up before getting on the highway. I had just finished filling up when a lady walked up to me. She was really ratty looking with crazy blonde dyed hair. But this is the backwoods of Florida, so no judgment. There were really kind people who looked like that in those parts. She started talking to me about how her car had run out of gas. She pointed to an old junker parked over near the convenience store, and if I could possibly give her some cash to get home. I usually don't say yes to things like that, but it was Thanksgiving weekend, so I was feeling extra generous. I told her that I'd be happy to fill up her car a little to get her home. Then it started getting weird. She kept insisting I give her cash and that the car was so empty she couldn't drive it to a pump. I don't know why I didn't leave right then and there, but again, I was in a very good mood. I told her if she had a gas can, I would put some in, but I didn't feel comfortable giving her cash. She kept objecting, but eventually went over and pulled a gas can from her car. I started filling it up. She put her hand on me and said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I told her no, politely. She said she wanted to pay me back somehow for the gas and asked if I wanted to come to her place. I told her no, less politely. She kept touching my shoulder, thanking me, and then offered me a blowjob behind the station, so I stopped the gas pump, got in my car, and left her there with the gas can. I called my mom a little later and told her about the creepy, sleazy encounter. She paused and asked me if this lady had ratty blonde hair and looked like she was on drugs. I confirmed that yes, that is what she looked like, and how could she know that? This lady was apparently all over the news. She was a prostitute in town and had been at a party earlier. An exchange had gone south, and her baby had been kidnapped by a client of hers and left under a bush in town. She hadn't even bothered to call the police about the missing child until later. They were both arrested, and they were both charged. This all took place back in November of last year. I booked an entire trip in order to propose to my then girlfriend. I flew us both to Florida to go to Disney World and to the last concert of one of my favorite bands, Amberlin, and of course propose. We had a blast. I proposed in the Disney castle. She said yes, and everything went well. We took off the next morning, Thanksgiving Day, on the way home connecting through San Francisco. About 30 minutes into the flight, the captain comes on the intercom and announces that one of the engines wasn't depressurizing properly. We do a loop back to the airport and get unloaded into the terminal as we wait for another plane to be ready. When we got to the terminal, my now fiancée switched her phone back from airplane mode, and within a minute she had 10 plus voicemails all from the same number, which she didn't know. Fearing the worst, we called the number without listening to any of the voicemails. I knew something was wrong as soon as she started talking to them. Her face went blank, and she didn't say a word. I told her to give me the phone, and she did. I asked who it was, and the voice I heard back just sounded dead. Absolutely no hint of emotion to it. All he said was, "I will kill both of you as soon as you land in Seattle." I asked who he was again, and he just hung up. She said she had no idea who it was, and I certainly didn't know the voice. I called him back, and when he would answer, he would just repeat the time that we were landing. Little did he know that we were delayed hours. I used to work in telecom, and I pulled some strings to get a name and address from the phone number that he used. Neither of us knew the name nor the address. She looked him up on Facebook, and she had one mutual friend with him, her ex-best friend, who we'll call Karen, that she was no longer friends with as she got wrapped up in heavy drug usage and stole from my fiancé. We did a little more digging and found out he was the boyfriend of Karen's new best friend. My theory is Karen saw the post that my fiancé was posting on social media about the trip, the engagement, and the great time we were having, and she was pissed and wanted to piss on our parade. I didn't take it as a joke, however. A death threat is a death threat, and in my mind as meth heads, they could follow through with it on a whim. I called him and talked over his rambling and told him I was armed, knew where he lived, and was not afraid to take things into my own hands. He hung up on me, so I called the Seattle area law enforcement, and they told me to call back on a non-holiday. So I called the emergency line, and they reiterated the same statement. We were on our own. We ended up flying in close to 9 hours after our original arrival time. Once we landed, we both had a single voicemail. Hers I assumed was from the guy, and mine I had no idea, as he hadn't been calling my phone. My voicemail was from my dad, who said he had gotten a call from my neighbors saying that my mailbox had been destroyed, looked like it had been hit by a car and the mail stolen from it. Her voicemail, however, was the guy screaming, "Where were you? How dare you?" and plenty of other threats and random yelling. I drove home and dropped off my fiancée at her house, insisting she not come with me to my place in case there was someone still there. They threw a brick through my window with an old picture of my fiancé and Karen attached to it. I tried calling him, to no answer. I went to bed after covering up the window with a tarp and making sure my fiancé was okay. I filed a police report the next day. They said I couldn't do anything without seeing them on my property. We blocked everyone involved on social medias and went about our lives. I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks when he sent me a picture of my fiancée working. I immediately called her and told her to go in the back of her work, a bubble tea shop. I then called mall security and explained the situation, but by the time they got to the food court where the picture was taken from, he was gone. At this point I was done messing around. I knew his address and swung by and dropped off a note attached to a critical defense .40 caliber bullet saying, "This is your last chance to leave her alone. This is your only warning." It's been almost 9 months now. Haven't heard a word or seen them again. But for both of our sakes, I sincerely hope not to meet him. I decided to post the story of my best friend and what her life is like with a stalker. She knew him through a mutual friend. He lived in Delaware. We live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He came to visit his friend, met her once, then decided to move here. After he had lived here for 6 months, they began dating. 3 months into them dating, he admitted he had moved here because he wanted to be closer to her, even though they weren't romantically involved at the time. Before they ever dated, he asked her what she wanted for her birthday. She said that she likes stars, so just something with stars on it. He literally bought her a star in the sky and named it Tara. It was also accompanied with a very intense and creepy love letter. She didn't see it as a warning sign and liked the attention. I told her that it was overboard and creepy. The first week of them dating, he began going through her phone and purse at every opportunity. She was furious and told him her phone is private. She said he should only snoop if he had a good reason to do so, not just because he wants to keep tabs on who she texts. She puts a lock on her phone, but it doesn't take long for him to figure out the lock code. He didn't admit to going through her phone again, but she knew he was, because he would always seem to bring up a person that may have texted her that day, or the subject that was spoken of. Some phone numbers of her closet guy friends had been changed in her phone as well. He wouldn't let her go anywhere without him. He would make plans for her every single day of the week, and then make her promise to follow through with the plans, even though they lived together. If she ever went back on the plans because something else came up that she wanted to do, he would throw a fit and say that she's a liar because she didn't keep her promise. It was things like she had promised to eat dinner at home with him, small things, and he would often react violently. She became increasingly agitated with his controlling and smothering behavior, and told him that she wanted to go have girl time with me, that she needs some breathing space for a night. He made her promise to let him come if he would hang out with other people. About an hour before she was coming to meet me, I got a phone call from a friend that had moved across the country. He was in town and wanted to see me. I told him that I would have a friend with me that night, but we'd swing by his house for about an hour if she was okay with it. I asked Tara if she's cool with it, and she says of course. A few minutes later, I get a text from him asking if he could come because of the promise that Tara had made to him. I said I'm sorry, but I don't think it's acceptable. This is a friend that I haven't seen in several years, and I'm already taking one person over to his mom's house that he doesn't know. It would be rude to bring another. We're only staying there for about an hour anyways. A few minutes after, Tara texts and says she's walking out her door. She never makes it to my house. I called and texted, but couldn't get her. I finally get just one text from her that simply said, "Help." I immediately drove to her apartment, where I found her on her balcony. He had stolen her phone and locked her on her balcony so she couldn't leave. They broke up for a while, and I guess out of being lonely she got back with him. One night he burst through my front door unannounced because he hadn't talked to Tara in 30 minutes. She went to dinner with a family friend, and he was following her and spying on her. Her phone had died. He panicked when he lost track of her. He freaked out in my living room and accused me of lying for her. I also found out that he had saved the numbers of all the guys she had in her phone. I told him he was not allowed to be near me again, even if Tara was with him. He seemed to act normal for a while, until Tara became pregnant. He was ecstatic, and she was scared. After about a week, she started getting excited about being a parent. That was until she started adding some things up. Her birth control had mysteriously vanished not long before she got pregnant. He was giving her vitamins every day and watching her take them. He said she needed to take them because she was anemic. She looked up the pills, and they were for fertility. She also remembered a few times he had said he was wearing a condom, and she didn't think it felt like one was there. He had been trying to get her pregnant. She understandably chose not to keep the baby after finding this out. She was terrified of him after this. He would have used the baby as a way to get to Tara. It would have meant nothing more to him, and they split again. He still lived in their apartment after they split, and she would drop by here and there to get some of her stuff. He seemed to be handling things okay, until Thanksgiving. He threw her all over the apartment when she stopped by for her stuff. That night he said he was going to spend the night out of town in Nashville, and that he needed Tara to stay there and watch his puppy. She made sure it had food and water, but didn't want to be there in case he came back. He did. At 1 a.m. she gets dozens of phone calls from him. He was never in Nashville. He was trying to get her alone and flipped his shit when she wasn't there. He sent her over 115 texts in 1 minute that all said, "Respond to me." He began driving by her work and house all the time. He would call and text her incessantly. He told her that he wasn't promising his sanity or her safety, that he would kill her. He started taking her mail. I told her that I would go get her mail for her, but he said he wouldn't give it to me. He'd only give it to her if she came in person. He began threatening me and saying that it was my fault. Yes, I had encouraged her to get away from him. He was insane, and everyone was scared for her. She was living at my house because he didn't know where I lived at the time. I finally decided to treat him like a kid, and I called his mother in Delaware. I told her of his behavior and threats, and asked if she could help him. He ended up moving back to Delaware, but would still call and text Tara all the time. He also made sure to bash her to every person she knew. He would come back to town often. He would go places where her friends worked. He would drive by her work. He would send her gifts. Sometimes she'd see him waiting outside of places she was at. It finally stopped. She had a year of silence from him. She had even moved to a different state with the guy she was dating. Her and her boyfriend split, and she moved back home to Chattanooga to start working at a hotel. He came into her hotel and bought a room for the night. The next morning he checked out and drove back to Delaware. He drove 12 hours to stay at her hotel for 1 night, and then turned around and went back. He sent her a text a few months ago saying he's moving back there. For several years, she has constantly been on edge. She gets nervous if she sees a car like his. She has the genuine fear that he will hurt her if he gets the opportunity. She thinks he'll kill her one day. And I'm also afraid that he will. She has numerous police reports over this guy. I hate seeing how he's damaged her, and she's afraid to get close to another guy. She doesn't want kids now. She's always nervous. And we still use the buddy system. She doesn't go anywhere at all by herself. It only takes 1 moment of her being alone for him to get to her. Learn the warning signs. Learn what to do if you are being stalked. Don't ever let your life turn into what hers.